The night air was sharp and thin, its icy fingers slipping through the gaps in Lucas's coat as he stepped out of Ceylan's cave. The cold bit at his skin, but he barely noticed. His thoughts were still tangled in the weight of what had transpired inside, the cryptic words of the dying seer, the fragments of a prophecy that refused to reveal itself, the lingering feeling that something was missing. The wind howled through the jagged mountain peaks, swirling the snow into restless patterns across the frozen ground. Above, the sky was heavy with thick, swirling clouds, blotting out the stars and leaving the world in shades of gray and black. It was the kind of darkness that seemed to breathe, shifting and pulsing at the edges of his vision. Lucas exhaled, watching his breath curl in the frigid air before it vanished. A weight settled in his chest, not just from exhaustion, but from something deeper, something instinctual. Something was wrong. The stillness of the night wasn't normal. His pulse quickened, the hair on the back of his neck rose. Then, movement. A massive shadow lunged from the darkness, and before he could react, something slammed into him with the force of an avalanche. The impact sent him flying. His boots left the ground, his ribs crushed by a brutal, unrelenting force. He barely had time to gasp before he was hurled backward, snow exploding into the air as he slammed against the ground. Pain ripped through his body. A sharp gasp escaped him, but it was cut short as an overwhelming weight pinned him down. The breath in his lungs fled, leaving him gasping, his ribs groaning under the pressure of something massive and solid. A deep, guttural snarl cut through the wind. Lucas's eyes snapped open just in time to see the towering, fur-covered form of the beast looming over him. Its hulking silhouette blotted out what little light remained, its fur bristling in the wind like a creature woven from the storm itself. Two massive saber-like fangs gleamed in the dark, glistening with frozen spit. The golden glow of its predatory eyes locked onto him, flickering with something intelligent, something that made Lucas's stomach twist. This wasn't a mindless monster. It had planned this. The beast let out a low, rumbling growl, the sound reverberating deep in Lucas's chest. Then, before he could think, before he could fight, it moved. Claws closed around him. A crushing grip seized his chest, the sheer power of it making his ribs creak in protest. Lucas gasped, his breath hitching as his entire body was lifted off the ground like he weighed nothing. His limbs flailed, instinct kicking in as he tried to twist free, but the beast's hold was unbreakable. The world lurched violently as the creature turned and ran, carrying him into the storm. The wind ripped past his ears, a deafening roar as the beast surged forward with terrifying speed. Lucas struggled, his body thrashing against the unyielding grasp, but it was like fighting against a mountain. His fingers clawed at the beast's fur, trying to pry himself loose, but the thick, matted strands slipped through his grasp like rope soaked in ice. Panic surged in his chest. No. He couldn't let this happen. He threw his mind outward, reaching for the power that had always been there, his telekinesis, his fire, anything. But his thoughts were chaotic, tangled, fracturing under the sheer panic closing around him. He couldn't focus, couldn't find his center. He sucked in a desperate breath, trying again. Push it back. His mind lashed out, and for a moment, just a moment, he felt the beast's grip shudder. A faint tremor. A ripple of force. But then, a sudden, crushing pressure smashed into his mind. Lucas's vision flashed white. A foreign presence slammed against his own like a battering ram, vast and ancient and primal. It was like trying to move a mountain. His power crashed against it and shattered, scattering like dust in the wind. The beast didn't just resist his telekinesis. It overpowered him. Lucas choked on a gasp, his limbs locking as a shockwave of mental backlash sent his thoughts spiraling. The world blurred, his pulse hammering against his skull, his lungs burning from lack of air. Then, a jolt as the beast leapt, clearing a sharp ridge in a single bound. Lucas felt his stomach drop, the sensation of weightlessness lasting only a split second before they crashed back down. The impact rattled through him, pain crackling through his ribs as he bounced in the beast's grasp, his head nearly slamming against its shoulder. He could barely think. Everything was moving too fast. The wind swallowed the sounds of his struggle, but a voice, faint, distant. Lucas. His pulse spiked. Mina. He tried to turn his head, his breath hitching. His ears strained to catch more, but the storm was thick, the wind howling through the crags. Had she seen him? Had she seen where the beast was taking him? His thoughts were a tangled mess of fear and adrenaline. The beast ran faster, its massive limbs propelling them into deeper shadows, away from the cave, away from the others. The landscape changed. Slopes became sheer cliffs. Snow gave way to solid ice. He could feel it now. A descent. It wasn't taking him to another ridge. It was taking him down. Lucas clenched his teeth, his fingers twitching, his mind clawing for something, anything to grab onto. He couldn't let this happen. He couldn't disappear. Not like this. With one last desperate effort, he gathered the remnants of his frayed concentration and shoved outward with everything he had left. The force of his telekinesis rippled through the beast's arm, making its muscles seize for just an instant. The creature snarled, a sound of pure annoyance, and then it hit him. A sharp, stunning impact to his temple. His vision went white. For a fraction of a second, the world blinked out. By the time he came back, the wind had vanished. The open air was gone. Darkness swallowed everything. The smell of damp fur and ancient stone filled his senses. The air was thick, unmoving. No more snow. No more wind. He was underground. And somewhere, in the shadows ahead, something breathed. Mina's heartbeat slammed against her ribs the instant she saw Lucas disappear into the storm. She didn't think. She ran. Her body reacted before her mind could catch up, launching her into the night with the speed of a living arrow. The world blurred. The cave, the others, the jagged cliffs behind her. They all vanished in a streak of motion as she surged forward, her boots barely touching the frozen ground. The wind screamed past her ears, a wild, unrelenting force of ice and howling darkness. But she didn't care. She had to reach him. Ahead, the beast was already a monstrous shadow tearing through the storm, its massive form flickering in and out of sight like a phantom. But Mina wasn't afraid. She had the advantage. She was faster. The thought was like fire in her veins, spurring her forward. The mountains, treacherous terrain, the shifting ice, the unstable ridges, the sheer cliffs, none of it mattered. She was built for this. The wind was just another current to cut through, the ice just another obstacle to dance over. Her feet barely touched the ground as she pushed harder, faster, her lungs burning, her mind locking onto one singular thought. Lucas. The beast was just ahead. She could hear its massive footfalls, its heavy breathing, the crunch of its claws sinking into ice. It was fast, incredibly fast for something so huge, but Mina was closing in. The distance shrank. 20 meters. 15. 10. Almost there. She reached out. Then suddenly, the beast veered left. Too sharp, too fast. Mina's eyes widened. The path ahead of her was solid ice, a sloping sheet that led into a sheer, yawning drop into nothingness. A trap. She skidded, her boots carving deep grooves into the frozen surface, her momentum threatening to hurl her straight over the edge. No. Not like this. With a breathless snarl, she twisted her body mid-slide, angling herself just right. Her hand shot out, catching a jagged outcrop. Ice bit into her palm, but she didn't care. Her body swung wildly, momentum threatening to rip her free, but she gritted her teeth and held on. Then, with a swift, violent twist of her hips, she used the force of the slide to launch herself off the ledge, flipping midair before landing hard against the rock face. She didn't stop. The moment her feet hit solid ground, she was running again. But the beast had gained distance. Mina's chest heaved, her breath coming in fast bursts as she scanned the terrain ahead. The creature was moving differently now. This wasn't just an escape, it was a calculated retreat. It knew she was chasing it. And it knew exactly how to slow her down. She cursed. The storm thickened, the swirling snow growing denser, filling the air with blinding white and shifting shadows. Mina's enhanced senses strained against the growing obstruction, trying to lock on to the beast's presence through the wind and ice. Then, a flicker of motion. There. She darted after it again, her muscles screaming as she pushed herself faster, harder. The cold stung her cheeks, the wind tore at her hair, but none of it mattered. Lucas was still ahead, still within reach. She could save him. Then, the beast changed course again. This time it vaulted over a cluster of boulders, landing with brutal efficiency before plunging straight into a deep ravine. Mina's pulse spiked. No. She skidded to a halt at the very edge, peering down, but the darkness had already swallowed them. Her breath came in ragged gasps, steam curling into the freezing air as she stood there, staring into the abyss, heart hammering. No sound, no motion, only silence. Her chest tightened. Lucas was gone. A sharp, bitter wave of frustration crashed into her. She clenched her fists so tight her nails dug into her palms, her entire body trembling, not from cold, but from helpless rage. She had been so close, so close. She scanned the ravine again, eyes darting, searching, desperate. She tried reaching out, tried to feel Lucas through their bond. Nothing. Nothing but the void. Her fingers twitched, her heart pounded. For a fleeting second she considered jumping in. But she knew better. The beast had led her here on purpose. It wanted her to follow, to trap her just like it had taken Lucas. Mina forced herself to breathe. She was angry, desperate, afraid, but she wasn't stupid. Her grip on reality snapped back into place. Her pulse slowed, her muscles tensed, her mind sharpened. No, not yet. She memorized the location. Then, she turned and ran. Mina's breath burned in her throat, the cold gnawing at her lungs as she skidded to a halt atop a precarious ridge. Snow and loose ice slid beneath her boots, crunching sharply as she steadied herself. Her pulse thundered in her ears, but beneath it, beneath the roar of the wind and the biting air, there was only silence. The beast was gone. She scanned the shadows, her sharp eyes cutting through the shifting mist of whirling frost and snow. Her chest rose and fell in ragged motions, her muscles still coiled, ready to push forward, to chase, to fight, to find him. But there was nowhere left to go. The storm had swallowed them. Lucas was nowhere. A deep, raw frustration burned in her stomach, twisting into something bitter and sharp. She had been too slow. Too slow. She clenched her fists, nails digging into her palms, her mind refusing to accept what had just happened. She had been right behind them. If she had been just a fraction faster, if she had reacted just a second sooner, no. She shut down the thought before it could fester. Regret was a waste of time. She wasn't here to mourn. She was here to find Lucas. Mina's breath steadied, her jaw tightening as she focused on her surroundings. She turned her head slightly, listening, not just with her ears, but with every heightened sense she had. The wind howled, sharp and merciless, but she strained past it, past the shifting ice and creaking cliffs. Then, a sound. Faint. Distant. Lucas's muffled voice. Her stomach lurched. Mina's boots dug into the snow as she sprinted toward the sound, her breath quickening. She followed the echoes, weaving through the labyrinth of jagged rocks and deep, icy slopes, chasing the faint remnants of his presence. The closer she got, the softer they became, the distorted echoes of his struggles. The beast's heavy footfalls, fading, then silence. A final, resounding stillness that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. Mina skidded to a stop once more, her chest heaving, her breath curling in the cold. She turned in a slow circle, scanning the terrain, every crag, every shadowed crevice, every sheer drop where the beast could have vanished into the unknown. Nothing. It had taken him. It had taken him, and she had no idea where. A snarl tore itself from her throat, her frustration boiling over into something near violent. She slammed a fist into the nearest rock wall, sending a spray of ice scattering. She had been right there. Right. There. Her fingers trembled, aching with the urge to keep running, to find a way down, to keep going no matter what. But she knew better. This wasn't just an escape, it was a trap. The beast had outmaneuvered her, led her to unfamiliar ground. If she kept chasing blindly, she wouldn't just lose Lucas. She'd lose herself too. Mina forced herself to breathe. Think. She turned her focus to the terrain, committing every jagged cliff, every unnatural slope, every change in elevation to memory. She mapped the area in her mind, burning it into her thoughts so that when she came back, and she would come back, she would know exactly where to start. A vow settled deep in her bones, unwavering, unshakable. She would return, and she would find him. She exhaled sharply, eyes narrowing as she marked one last detail. A small ridge of blackened stone, jutting out in a sharp overhang near the ravine. It was distinct, a landmark she could use later. That was where Lucas had vanished. With one last lingering glance into the abyss, Mina turned and ran. The storm rose behind her, swallowing the sound of her retreat. But it didn't matter. She would be back. And when she returned, she wouldn't be alone.